After decades of economic stagnation, Japan is really standing at a historic crossroads. It's a huge challenge. And honestly, it's one that a lot of developed nations are facing. How do you kickstart growth when you're already buried under a mountain of debt? The country is facing a trillion-yen question that could literally define its future for generations to come. So, what's really at stake here? Let's dive in and break it down.
At the very heart of this is a massive new economic policy. But here's the debate. Is it a bold, necessary investment in a prosperous future? Or is it just racking up an impossible bill that our kids and grandkids will be stuck paying? That's the core conflict we're digging into today. And believe me, the stakes could not be higher. Why? Well, because Japan's national debt is already a staggering 250% of its GDP. Let that sink in. That is the highest ratio among all major advanced nations. And that massive number hangs over every single decision that has to be made.
So the policy that's causing all this commotion is called responsible active fiscal policy. Now, the idea isn't just to spend money for the sake of it. No, it's about making these huge strategic government investments in what they see as future-proof industries. We're talking things like green transformation, or GX, and those super advanced semiconductors. The hope is to spark economic growth so powerful that it actually ends up fixing the country's finances in the long run.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the argument to spend our way to growth. Then, we'll look at the case for cutting back to survive. We'll see exactly where these two ideas clash, and finally, we'll get to the verdict of a formal debate on this whole topic and what it all means for, your wallet.
All right, first up, the affirmative side. Their argument is, well, it's optimistic, it's forward-looking, and it's really rooted in that classic belief that, hey, you've got to spend money to make money. This is the case for making a bold, strategic investment in the future.
Their case really boils down to three main pillars. First, strategic investment. They say that in these super high-risk, high-reward fields like microchips, the government has to step in and put some skin in the game. That gives private companies the confidence to invest too. Second, they believe all this spending will create this great positive feedback loop of higher wages and healthy inflation. And third, and this is the crucial part, their answer to that giant debt: don't just obsess over cutting the debt itself, that's the numerator. Instead, grow the entire economy, the GDP, which is the denominator. Make the whole pie so much bigger that the debt becomes a much more manageable slice. And this quote, wow, it just perfectly sums up their whole philosophy. They're saying, look, this isn't a handout. They see it as asset formation. By building up brand new industries, they argue they're actually creating the tax revenue sources of tomorrow. It's an investment, not an expense.
Okay, now let's flip the coin and look at the other side. The negative argument is all about caution, fiscal discipline, and the very real, very scary risks of an economy that's already this deep in the red. This is the case to cut back, to tighten the belt, in order to survive. Their case is built on three really stark warnings. First up, the ticking time bomb of interest rates. For years, rates were near zero, but now they're starting to rise. They warn that even a tiny hike could cause the interest payments on that 250% debt to absolutely explode, maybe even triggering a fiscal collapse. Second, market distortion. They argue that this kind of government spending doesn't boost innovation. It actually stifles it by propping up inefficient zombie companies and crowding out the real entrepreneurs. And finally, inflation, the silent thief. Pumping more money into the system, they say, just acts as a hidden tax that quietly eats away at everyone's hard-earned savings. This quote really captures their deep skepticism, doesn't it? To them, the whole pro-spending argument is just built on a dangerous fantasy, this illusion that a country can simply borrow its way to prosperity. They believe real sustainable growth comes from tough reforms, not from the government's checkbook.
So we've heard both sides of the story. Now let's put their arguments right up against each other and see exactly where they collide. This is the heart of the debate.
Now, what's so interesting here is how this table just crystallizes the entire debate. When you ask what's the biggest risk, the pro-spending side says a quiet, slow decline if we do nothing. The other side says a sudden, catastrophic collapse if we spend too much. Total opposites. On the government's role, one side sees it as a catalyst that sparks private investment, while the other is convinced it crowds out and stifles it. And on inflation, the spenders say their investments will fix supply chain issues and solve it, while the savers say spending just pumps more money into the economy and makes it way worse.
So these arguments were actually presented in a formal debate with a whole panel of judges. A verdict was reached. And, the outcome of a national debate like this has very real consequences.
for everything: wages, taxes, and the value of your savings.
So the big question is, when you're faced with these two completely different visions for the future, which argument actually won the day? Was it the optimistic gamble for growth, or was it the cautious plea for discipline?
And the winner was the negative side, the argument for caution and fiscal discipline. In the end, the judges found their case to be more convincing given the current economic climate.
So why'd they win? Well, the judges pointed to three key reasons. First, that 250% debt figure was just too massive to ignore. The risk that rising interest rates could outpace any new economic growth was deemed too great of a gamble. Second, in an economy that already has a real labor shortage, the argument that the government would just end up competing with private companies for the few available workers and resources, crowding them out, that felt very real, very tangible. And third, framing inflation as a hidden tax on ordinary people's savings was just an incredibly powerful and persuasive counter to the promise of future growth.
So in the end, it all comes down to this one final question. What's the true meaning of being responsible here? Is it taking a bold, risky gamble to try and break out of decades of stagnation, even if it could lead to a spectacular collapse? Or is it accepting a sort of managed, quiet decline to avoid that risk at all costs? The formal debate may be over, but for Japan, that trillion yen question is far from settled.